Total War, Rome 2. Right up until the release of Three Kingdoms, Total War, Rome 2 had the honor of being Creative Assembly's most played historical strategy game by a significant margin. It's had a loyal core of many thousands of players for most of its life, which inspired developer Creative Assembly to create more expansions for the game despite it being quite old by now. Rome 2 had a rocky start, but it's in a very good place these days. Rome, Total War is a cult favorite for many older series fans, and Rome 2, by and large, is a better, more encompassing game. It's not perfect, but unless you're really turned off by the time period, this is an excellent one to try out. Total War, Warhammer I, 2 and Imp. 3. A departure from their usual fare, Creative Assembly landed quite the coup when they won the right to work on Games Workshop's Warhammer Fantasy license. This was at a time when the IP itself had been axed in the tabletop world in favor of the Age of Sigmar's New Fantasy line. Going fantasy for the first time also allowed the design team to let their hair down and get creative, with everything from the strategy map to tactical battles getting fantastical twists and innovations. Some are great, others are very much subjective. The tactical battles are a bit divisive, but no one can deny it's been a success. Total War, Warhammer 2 is where the new fantasy-fueled Total War format really shines, although you will need the first game anyway to partake in the ambitious, grand strategy-style, Modal Empires, map that combines the landmass of the first two games. The series is looking to get even greater now that we know Warhammer 3 is coming, bringing with it fan favorites Kislev, elusive Grand Cathay, and plenty more besides. Supremacy 1914. Supremacy 1914 is a game that allows you to step into the shoes of a World War I general. Here you get to choose any of the nations who were involved in the First World War, and then, along with up to 499 players, you each play your parts as the war unfolds. Games will be long and intricate, exactly the kind of things strategy fans will love to sink their teeth into. As you would expect, each of the playable countries is a little bit different, with access to varying resources, and the ability to create military forces that reflect those actually used within history. That's an impressive level of detail in this game, which is particularly impressive when you consider that it is free to play. Call of War, World War II. Did you like the sound of Supremacy 1914, but find yourself thinking, by golly, that game would be so much more appealing if it were about the Second World War, rather than the First? If so, you should definitely try out Call of War, World War II, because it takes the exact same formula, but applies it to WW2 instead, which, as you can imagine, changes things up quite a lot. There are 10 nations to choose from, including Germany, the UK, the US, and the Soviet Union, and each of them plays very differently. What you do while in control of these countries is up to you. Do you want to invest in the economy and forge alliances with other countries? Or do you want to tear through the world like a warlord? There are many options available to you, and with the longest game going on for 411 days, you'll have plenty of time to experiment with different strategies in this tactical arena. Romans, Age of Caesar. Grand strategy and the Roman Empire go together like cheese and onions, and if you've ever wanted to feel like you're a part of building a genuine, virtual empire, then we recommend you give Romans, Ages of Caesar a whirl. In this free-to-play game, you must work cooperatively with up to 16 other players in order to rebuild a Roman city. Together you'll defend your growing community from barbarian attacks, develop trade routes with cities run by other players, and gather resources so that your city can grow and prosper. It's a really fun game to get caught up in, and a fun MMO spin on the grand strategy genre. Crusader Kings III. Released in September 2020, this is the highly anticipated sequel to 2011's Crusader Kings II. What makes the series unique amongst grand strategy games is the idea that you aren't just managing a kingdom or nation, you're managing a person and their family. From the lowliest of counts to the King of Kings, you are put in charge of an entire dynasty of characters and tasked with ensuring its continued success and domination amidst the backdrop of medieval Europe. Crusader Kings III has doubled down on this idea, marrying the RPG and the map-based aspects in a way its predecessor was never really designed to handle. T's a great one to start with if you're a grand strategy newbie, as the development team have put a lot of work into tutorialization and UI design, making sure the player is never more than a couple of clicks away from finding what they need. Europa Universalis IV, the previous gold standard of Paradox Grand Strategy. This is the fourth iteration of a series that was originally adapted from an old-school board game of the same name, which has since been remade into a board game, also with the same name. Pull your nation through the turbulent times of the 15th century all the way through to the Age of Reason and Napoleon's Revolution, upgrading your technology, your political acumen, and your ability to judge your neighbors along the way. Among historical grand strategy games, Europa Universalis IV is notable for not focusing exclusively on Europe but giving access to much of the world for the whole span it covers. Want to turn a First Nation tribe into an industrial powerhouse to invade Europe? Want to dissolve the HRE and form Germany early? The only limit is your imagination. Stellaris, the first of Paradox's grand strategy games to stray into 4X territory thanks to its sci-fi theme. In Stellaris you're no longer limited to simple terrestrial life. Create a new spacefaring species, decide on its political and social inclinations, then take to the stars to spread an empire across a randomly generated galaxy. You will need to compete for resources and position against your equals, and the polities of long-fallen superiors. Stellaris is over 5 years old now and already has several DLCs which extend and expand options for your space empires. While it may not have the historical depth that other Paradox titles can depend on, it is more focused on evolving new experiences with new sci-fi stereotypes as often as it can, with heavy emphasis on player customization. Hearts of Iron IV. This series is unique in its attempt to be a true, grand strategy World War II game, as opposed to other war games that operate at similar strategic scales but generally forego the breadth of the entire war. Much like EU4, here you can play as any nation on any continent during this era, with the politics serving as the backdrop to a World War II-like event. You must do your best to profit and survive, and not necessarily in that order. Hearts of Iron IV is going through somewhat of a transition. Since launch, it's been torn between the need to try and provide an authentic, as it happened, World War II experience, and an emerging player base that enjoys a more sandbox approach, allowing for alt history and what-if scenarios. Because of this, not all countries have equal access to interesting decision trees at the moment, with the focus currently being on those who were significant players at the time. It does currently seem to be favoring alt history with each update, so bear that in mind if you're a World War II enthusiast. Total War: Three Kingdoms. Released in May 2019, this Total War game attempts to marry the hardcore, historically based sensibilities of the classic titles with some of the better innovations to come out of the Total Warhammer Fantasy line. Creative Assembly has been threatening to do a Three Kingdoms era China game even before Rome 2, so it's nice to see them finally realize this goal. T's been a resounding success. Three Kingdoms has made the campaign layer better than it's ever been, with some very meaningful character interactions and dynamics between the various factions. Real-time tactical combat sits somewhere between the Warhammer and other historical titles, and while there are certain aspects that will come down to personal taste, it's still a very robust and very decent tactical battle engine that really helps give weight to the political machinations of the turn-based layer. It's a shame really that Creative Assembly decided to end support for the game, barely 2 years after it was released. Field of Glory: Empires. Released in July 2019, Field of Glory: Empires is an historical grand strategy game from Slytherin. It attempts to occupy the space between Rome 2 and Imperator Rome and brings with it some smart ideas and decent design choices. It's a tad old school, but then the developers have a history of creating hardcore, old-fashioned wargames, so some of that was going to bleed through. It definitely has the military focus of older Total War and Paradox titles, but also some really interesting mechanics in terms of Empire and population management. It's also not gone for the same breadth that Imperator has, instead going for some very focused abstractions that remind us of the original Rome. Total War. Empire's other ace in the hole is the ability to sync up with another Slytherin title, Field of Glory 2, and export the battle data from Empire so you can play out the fight in full like you can in a Total War game. It's an extra step, but the process is as smooth as it can be, and FOG2 is a really good tactical turn-based strategy game, to be fair. Now that it's out in the world, it'll be interesting to see where Slytherin take it. They're not known for paradox levels of support, but they're certainly more attentive than most, so you never know. Distant Worlds Universe. Much like Stellaris, Distant Worlds Universe is a Space 4X grand strategy game that's a Farsight meatier and more complex than its Paradox counterpart. If you're still not finding Stellaris to your tastes or are up for a challenge, this is definitely worth checking out. Distant Worlds is a complex game with a very steep learning curve, and past a certain point Empire management can become quite taxing. On the flip side, the game has a wonderful trick that lets you give nearly all functions over to an AI handler, allowing you to focus on whatever bit interests you the most. If you wanted to, you could even relinquish control over all but a single vessel, boldly going where no AI has gone before as you explore your procedurally generated galaxy. Being an older game, Distant Worlds has a decidedly old-school flavor about it, and more than any other entry on the list represents the nexus where 4X and grand strategy merge, and where the differences lie. We can't wait to see what Distant Worlds 2 will be like, which is due out sometime in Q1 2022.